Hello, everyone, and welcome to our launch of Care Experience and Culture, a digital archive of all things care experienced. My name is Dee Michelle, and I'm in Adelaide, South Australia. And I've been working on this project with my colleague Rosie Canning, who's located in the United Kingdom.
A wonderful partnership because we were both doing different things, but they were very related.
They were, and we both had Lem Sisse as kind of a pivotal point there because he was in Adelaide in 2011, but I missed him by a day. He'd left the state and left the country when I discovered him. And he had this, and what inspired my real life superheroes was his talking about all the fictional characters who had been in out-of-home care like Superman. And he was talking about this gap between these superheroes and how popular they are and the status of actual children in state care. And I got to thinking about collapsing that sort of gap between the two and had been for a number of years interested in hunting out people who had actually been in out-of-home care themselves and gone on to have successful lives, however we wanted to define that. So that was my starting point, but you'd also met Lem Sisse.
By then, goodness, yes, I had, and worked with him on the Christmas dinners. I think it was a bit of a desert before I met Lem. And I went along, I was working for the Reader organisation, and the chap that was managing us said, "Oh, I think you'd like this event that's on at the South Bank, From Pip to Potter." And I went along, and there was Lem talking about orphans in fiction, but he was really saying, there are heroes for a lot of people. The orphans in fiction were people's heroes, and yet why is it that the real children in care are not being treated at all well? So that was that was at the heart of what he was talking about. And that day I also met Josie Pearce, and Dr. Josie Pearce now, and she was doing her PhD, and she was looking at some of the earlier orphans, and she was looking at it from the perspective of being adopted, and wrote a novel and investigated the history of adoption as well. And it was that I'd sort of been thinking about doing a PhD, and then I thought, oh yeah, I had more of an idea by the end of that day what I wanted to do, and so that was how I sort of got into it. But that was, oh goodness me, I can't even remember what year that was, but it was quite a long, it was some year.
Kind of our start, but then we wanted to put something together, and really, Rosie, it's your idea for a digital archive, and I reckon that's your library background. I'm not sure I would have come up with that idea, but I did think it was brilliant. And so we were very fortunate to approach the Wellin Trust for some funding to do that. But also Jamie Crabb was pivotal because we asked him, I didn't know how to do that. My knowledge of websites is pretty minimal. So he was very pivotal in doing that and helping us to set up our collections, because by then we already had some collections of writers and books and films and television shows. And one of the things that we began to notice was that there is a diversity of representation when you see a whole lot together. So I was keen to hear about, and we're going to hear from Kenny a little bit more about representations, but we have noticed a diversity. I've also noticed that often people don't talk that it seems like it's a really common thing for people to use an orphan character, and there's different explanations for why that is. I've just finished reading The Orphan Master's Son, and the writer of that one, Adam Johnson, says that he used an orphan because the first person, this is a story set in North Korea, and the first person that he met who had defected from North Korea to America was actually an orphan. But the person he was talking to also mentioned that the orphan character gives the writer a bit of freedom and license because the orphan characters aren't tied down to any families, and also made the interesting observation that often orphans kind of notice things for the first time that perhaps people from other families don't, like love and connection and things like that. So that's kind of interesting. And we were also noticing that often, so the orphan character is quite common, but often in a synopsis, that point is absent. And I was thinking about a Tasmanian show that I watched where it called The Gloaming, which is a detective series. It's the cinematography is absolutely fantastic. Nowhere did they mention that it was all about foster care, about kids missing in foster care. And about the lead detective in that show had been in foster care himself, and he was played by Aaron Peterson, who's one of our best known actors, who was also in foster care as a kid himself. But when I looked at the reviews for that show, none of that was mentioned, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting, isn't it? And I think one of the most amazing things about this project is that we are going to be changing the narrative. At the moment, I think we've got about 1,300 entries, which is massive. And in a way, though, this is like phase one. We're putting things up, we're seeing what they look like, and sort of playing with the design and that sort of thing. But as I said, what we're doing, we are actually changing the narrative, because what we're going to do is we are going to talk about that person's care experience initially, before we then go on to look at what they've been doing in their lives, whether they're an actor or a writer, or work behind the scenes, or are not published. We've got some young poets on here that have not been published. They've published online, but not necessarily, with a publishing house or whatever. We've got people that are self-published, that have written books themselves and published them themselves. And it's going to be actually a community project. So hopefully, as people get to know about the Care Experience and Culture Archive, Digital Archive, they'll be able to join in, and we will have a facility on the website which means that you can just say, oh, okay, look, I've seen this. In fact, we have had people already emailing and say, oh, have you seen this? And so however people want to get in touch, Twitter, Facebook, emails, whatever, that'll be fantastic, because we want this is the heart of something, and it's the beginning of something. And it's a way for people to really think about the narrative that is around the Care Experience community, and to really discover just how wonderful we all are.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the point, the diversities of stories. And that was the other thing that you and I had in common, Rosie, was that idea of the danger of telling a single story. And I do remember reading a particular sociologist who said that that's what groups do. The powerful groups will tell the worst stories about the groups that they want to alienate and stigmatize and marginalize. They only tell the worst stories, whereas we want to accept that there may be some serial killers amongst us, not amongst this group, but that there's a diversity of us, that we do all sorts of interesting and different things as well. And it's the diversity that I think is the most important thing.
Yeah. I think we're going to look at the website, but not yet.
Okay.
But one of the things that I was thinking about earlier on today was when did we personally start to notice Care Experience characters? And I was having a think about that, and I wish I'd have asked this question years and years ago, because the answer is, I can remember being at university in my 30s, and we had a writer that came to give a talk. I was doing English literature at the time, and was it English? Yes, it was 1990 something, and actually it might have been towards the end of the 90s, and yes, she came to give a talk, and the book was called Island, and her name was Jane Rogers. And I bought the book, as you do, and when I got home and started to read it, it was like I'd been in a desert and so thirsty, and somebody had given me some water. And the novel opened with a young girl who was searching for her mother. Now, interestingly, Jane Rogers messed about with the stereotype, if you like, and she, at the beginning, portrayed this young girl as a murderer. You know, that's what she wanted the reader to think. In fact, it's totally the opposite. But I can remember thinking, my God, this is an absolutely amazing book. And I expect there's a lot of people here that will say, yeah, Rosie, you told me about that book. Because I'm always going on about it. So that was well, goodness knows how many years ago is that, in the sort of mid-90s. I don't know, can someone else work it out? Yeah, so that's, I think, when I realized something had been missing. And even though I'd read orphan narratives as a child, I don't remember reading anything about foster care. I think I may have read stuff about being adopted, but I don't remember children's homes or foster care. But you may have a different memory, Dee.
Yes, well, I guess I didn't notice it very much, but and Nell is here, hi Nell, when I started work on the history of foster care in Australia with Nell, then I gravitated, because I've long been a reader, I guess, of fiction, I gravitated to exploring that sort of history of a fiction about foster care in Australia. And I did notice this trend of back in the 1870s, when foster care was being instituted here, they tended to write stories almost as advertisements for foster care. You know, it was a really positive, good experience. And then often the foster care kid actually came from a wealthy background and found their family in the end. So it didn't reflect foster care as I knew it at all. And then about in the middle of the 20th century, there were some what I call protest novels from top Australian writers like Kylie Tennant, and she was writing a protest about the New South Wales child protection system, and I read every book review and nobody commented on it. It was like they hadn't even noticed that that's what she was doing.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until the 1990s and a worldwide, or I suppose at least a Western world sort of trend towards telling stories about childhoods and abusive childhoods broadly, that we started to see more about stories of foster care within Australia. So not a big trend, but I think I'm as guilty as anybody else of overlooking that at various times, because I do remember reading one of Kylie Tennant's books, and I started to read her not because of the foster care narrative, but for another reason, another project. And I was reading it for the second time, and I went, oh my God, she's talking about foster care. So I hadn't even kind of noticed it myself really the first time around. I was looking for something else, I guess, when I was reading it. So yeah, so it is quite interesting. But I think that one of the things that Nell also had noticed is that in terms of stories and inquiries in Australia and newspaper articles, the focus has actually been on children's homes and orphanages here. And so foster care has been out of the focus really quite a lot.
Right. So are we now going to... I don't think the website has finished loading. So, as usual, you know, technology always lets one down.
Yes, the best of plans. Well, Kenny, can we hand over to you then? We're very fortunate to have Kenny Murray and Kirsty Capes with us tonight. And I think of Kenny Murray as an award-winning agitator and activist. He works for Who Cares Scotland, for those of you who don't know. And that's for the Australians in the group. That's a national voluntary organisation working with care experienced young people and care leavers across Scotland. And in 2019, Kenny won the 2019 Young Persons Award for his work on the Who We Are campaign. And what Kenny's been doing is tackling negative media portrayals of people who are currently in or have grown up in care. He wants them to be portrayed in a balanced, accurate and fair way. And at the moment, he says, in both news and entertainment media, they're not. Instead, Kenny says, and I've quoted Kenny a few times on this, often care experience people get used as a shorthand for troubled or danger or damaged and dangerous, and represented as stalkers, as in the US Netflix series You, and serial killers, as in Paul Spector of the British show The Fall. So let's welcome Kenny to talk about his work in calling for improved representations of care experience.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if it works okay. Can you all see that? Yeah?
Yep, brilliant.
Okay, thanks for having me. What an introduction. You know, the thing that's drawn me to this is stories. People are fascinated with stories. Since I was a young boy, I've been fascinated with storytelling and reading stories, and I think it's really good for helping us understand who we are, what's happening in the world around us, and you know, understanding different cultures, different backgrounds, and you know, it's something that we should all aspire to. But one of the things that's been really clear to me from, again, a young age, is that the stories around care and care experienced people do tend to be unfair and accurate. And, you know, there's a reason for that, and I'll get to it. But before we get into that, I've got a short video. Some of you might have seen this, but I'm going to show you it. And what I want you to do is write in the comments what it is that you believe that you're seeing here. Tell me what the story is. Tell me what it is that you're watching. There is no sound. So, can anybody share with me what it is that they believe that they've seen in that short video?
Dee, I think everyone's on mute. Can they unmute themselves?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got triangle trying to below the circle. Is there anybody else that's seen that? Obviously hiding from the large triangle. You construct in the box.
Can you talk?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give a go. It looked like the big triangle and the little triangle were together, but then looked like there was something else happening, and the big triangle was trying to get the little triangle, the circle, into the box, but the circle looked a bit concerned about being in that box with the big triangle and tried to get out, and so did. And I think when this is what I saw, the circle and the small triangle left, the big triangle was a bit upset by that and mashed up the box.
Okay, thanks for
I
sharing.
don't know if that's representing a family or not, I'm not sure, but
oppression, sinister. So what I'm going to do is tell you, and I have heard lots of variations of all the answers that I'm hearing. I gave some of those answers the first time I seen this, but all it is just some shapes moving about a screen, and we've all attached a story to it. We've all attached a story to it from our own understanding of life, our own background. We're filling the gaps with what we believe is the answer, and that's what we do every day. When there's a gap, we fill it, and we fill it with what we know, and we fill it from what we have. And when we're looking at stories about care experienced people, we really need to understand what's filling the gaps. And when we understand what's filling the gaps, we understand why the stories that we tell about care experienced people and we hear about ourselves are unfair and inaccurate. In absence of like a personal relationship with a care experienced person, there might be three things that influence what you believe. And even with a personal relationship, there might be these three things, which is news media, entertainment media, and statistics. And all of these contribute to how the general public might understand care experienced people and how then stories and understanding is shaped. So when we look at statistics, you see these quoted quite a lot. These are some Scottish statistics, but I'm sure there's variations that look similar around the world. You're less likely to go to university, you're more likely to go to prison, you might be homeless, you might have some diagnosed mental health issues that sort of really debilitate you from being able to contribute to life. And, you know, without context, those statistics can really lead to a damaged understanding of what people can do, who people are, and what we can go on to achieve. And we see this, so this is an attitude survey carried out by Life Changes Trust, who are a funder of charities in Scotland, and they show that around a third of people in Scotland believe that children in care are more likely to get into trouble than people who aren't care experienced. Those with more socially conservative views view those in care more likely to be in care because their parents can't cope with their child's behaviour. Nearly 2 in 5 people aged 16 to 29 believe that children in care are worse behaved than other children, and those whose job involves working with people in care are more likely to believe that children in care are worse behaved than other children. So when we understand the statistics, we understand the public attitudes to people in care, we know that this exists for a reason. You know, people are filling all of those gaps and coming to these sort of conclusions. And the easiest way to understand where people might be getting this from is news media. And I've done some analysis over the last 5 years of stories about care experienced people across the world. And some of the most common types of stories told are shown on screen. You've got rags to riches features. You've got, you know, researched on new initiatives to help care experienced people, protests about children's homes, children in care going missing, you know, stuff coming out from different abuse inquiries around the world. And so people read all these are all the sort of stories we see about care experienced people. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial in on one of them, which is around protests against children's homes. And I've analysed a protest around the children's home from 2002 to 2009. And I'm going to highlight some parts of news stories that featured about this. So this is the headline: "Fight to stop new home for troubled kids." One mum who didn't want to be named said this is a close-knit area. It's a very quiet residential area. You know, she's not really saying anything there, but she is. A lot of school-aged children use the pathway in front of the house. A lot of parents are really worried. There's a primary and nursery nearby. Again, not really saying anything, but she really is. They will have a huge impact. We are sympathetic. We know these children have to go somewhere, but not here. It'll mean the police will have to go out constantly. There'll be intimidation of residents. These children go AWOL. They're not allowed to have guests and friends in the home, so we're going to have them congregating in the lanes, getting up to no good. It's totally unsuitable. You see that leap there from they're not allowed to have guests and friends to they'll be doing loads of sort of troubled stuff in the lane. A neighbour contacted the Evening Times to say to bring these young people into the community is truly wrong. Property areas in this area, property values in this house would be dramatically affected. So there's a lot happening there. It sounds like NIMBYism, you know, like not in my backyard. People are going, you know, I'm really worried about, you know, school places. I'm really worried about property prices. Actually, they'll be out late at night. But this all happens under the banner of troubled kids. and people all have these views of care experience people that we've got to be in their community causing trouble. So they shut the home down, and then they made a plan to reopen the home. Alarm! It planned to reopen home for troubled kids, cried the headline. A reminder that this paper led a campaign in running wild and terrorising the neighbourhood. So if you remember the article that I just highlighted, there was nothing about running wild and terrorising the neighbourhood. This had just been added. We suffered all the time. Windows were being damaged, cars were being damaged, slates were being thrown from the roof. My son was attacked when he was just 6 by a girl from the home. He was punched and kicked. They set fires and set alarms off all night. People were sending letters to let them know that this is happening. And the result was that home didn't reopen. And people celebrated that. But in the celebration article about that campaign, angry residents in Mount Vernon feared it could be used to house sex attackers and lead to an increase in crime and disorder. So we've gone from there might be trouble in the lanes, what about the property prices, to the thugs that run about like damaging cars, windows, to now we're sex attackers. And the council have assured people that they will monitor that situation for those sex attackers in that home. And when you look at that story in that period of time from 2002 to 2009, people were reading a newspaper to get like an understanding of what was going on in the world, and they were being told that this home was a home to troubled kids, and all these things that people were saying about them were running unchecked, unbalanced. And what that meant is that community was really impacted on how they understood care experience people living amongst them. And what I know is that a lot of that story is fabrication. This is the home in question, and this is a photo of me when I was taken into that home. And so I understand that these stories are false because I was living in that home during the time of that campaign. And the attitudes around the community, there was signs on the gates, there was protests, people were asking people to sign petitions in shops. And I'm like, what is it that drives people to campaign against children living in their community? And I can't understand it. And it's not an old phenomenon. This is still happening. This is a children's home protest in Wales in 2019. A lot of the same stuff, complex challenging behaviour. The language has changed, but it's the same stuff they're saying. No to high risk youth offenders home here, says a sign. It looks quite similar to a sign that was erected outside my children's home. And then when we look at the language used in the news articles about care experience people, I've pulled out some of the terms that I found most troubling. And we see that these are all in their eyes. Troubled childhood, bad parents, young thug. And you begin to understand the public mood. People are really worried. People have a level of protectionism. But ultimately, it's just really crap journalism. It's just really poor journalism. And I understand that because I interviewed Ken Armstrong, who won a Pulitzer Prize, around his story Unbelievable, which was, amplifying the voice of Marie, a care experienced woman who was raped and wasn't believed. And he has this lesson for journalists, which is don't assume, ask. And I think that's what's missing in news media. But then you have to wonder, news media alone isn't responsible for those attitudes. And for me, entertainment media, again, is a huge part of that. And it's this spectrum of superhero to psychopath, and what Lemn Sissay has to say, about people holding these superheroes up and worshipping them and, talking about them being the literal heroes. And then there's the psychopaths, and there's nothing in between, really. There's no nuance. I've pulled out some examples here. So we've got Paul Spector from The Fall. He is a guy who's a bereavement counsellor, grew up in a series of children's homes. He was abused, and he goes on to stalk, rape and murder young women. He was dubbed the Belfast Strangler. He later embarked on an abusive relationship with a 15-year-old before ultimately being imprisoned and completing suicide. 4 million people watch that on a weekly basis in the UK. Joe Goldberg gets a Netflix series, 40 million viewers in the week of its release. He, obsesses, stalks, murders people, and the reason we're given for that is that Joe grew up in an abusive foster placement. And it very quickly becomes clear that it's such a shorthand. It's how can we explain why this character is messed up? How can we explain what's driving this character's behaviour? And it all revolves around this idea of revenge, of you know, they've had a really poor childhood, so they're going to embark on that. And I think sometimes we can just be really grateful actually for stories about care experienced people, that we forget that we need to be able to challenge this. And one of the real sort of empowerment sort of areas for me to understand that is the understanding that our stories have got value. So this is just a small highlight of some stories that we looked at in a media club that I ran over a number of years. And this is, you know, how many people went to see things or watched things, how many books were sold, how much money has been grossed in stories that feature care experienced characters. In this small collection, you know, there's like so much money. So many people have watched it, so many books have sold. And I think we can often make the mistake that these stories don't have value. This is Oscar-winning movies which have featured care experienced characters since 1941. Our stories have got value. It's very clear that people understand our stories have got value. And I think we need to challenge that. And so to sort of illustrate what I've done around that area is I established a campaign, Who We Are. As Dee said, it won an award. And the main crux of that campaign was establishing a media club which worked across a variety of places. We established a media club in a prison. We established media clubs across Scotland and the UK. We had people contributing from around the world to understand what care experienced people believed about stories that represented their lives. And it became clear that everybody was being able to identify the stories which were fair and accurate and the stories which weren't. But there was something sort of sitting where some of the most popular stories were some of the most unfair and inaccurate representations. And there was something about the news media and the public understanding coming together to create this whirlwind of troubled and dangerous characters that people were being sucked into and were consuming. And that was beginning to impact how people understood care experienced people. So I've created opportunities for care experienced people to speak directly to writers, directors, and other influential people in the media. We worked with Sean Anders in Paramount Studios in the launch of the movie Instant Family. We've partnered with leading publishers in the launch of their books. Kirsty and I and Rosie did a sensitivity read on The Beaker Girls, which was the sequel to the book My Mum Beaker. We consulted on the My Mum Beaker TV show, and I challenged the public understanding from a journalism every day. And that's just kind of what I'm doing. What we all need to do is to create space for care experienced people to explore their own stories, our own stories, and whether that's for their own personal reflective sake or for being able to share that story to influence public understanding. And to do that, we need to remove the barriers to media roles. So we need care experienced writers and directors and cinematographers and publishers and journalists and makeup artists and costumers. And we need that because the depth and the sort of the real depth of care experienced stories can only be found through working with care experienced people. And if care experienced people are at every level of a story being told, it's going to be much deeper, much more accurate, much more fair. And we need to, in hand with that, challenge portrayals which are unfair and inaccurate. And going forward, we need to stop being grateful for this idea that people are writing and representing our lives and challenge every portrayal that we see that isn't fair and isn't accurate, because only when we do that are people going to listen and understand that they need to tell a different story. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Kenny. I can see why you're an award-winning agitator. I'm really interested and intrigued by that idea of the value created by our stories, and those figures were amazing, but I bet we don't see any of that money. Interestingly enough, that was really fantastic. We're going to hand over to Kirsty Capes now. Like Kenny, Kirsty Capes has been interested in representations of care for a while. As she said in a recent interview, the only representation young people in care see of themselves is a very negative stereotype that gets reinforced again and again. I had the pleasure of first meeting Kirsty in 2019, and she was almost at the end of her PhD in creative writing at Brunel University London then. And in that, she was looking at narratives of care experience in contemporary fiction, particularly those of girls and women. By then, Kirsty had already published poems and short stories in literary magazines, and she was also doing paid work to publish, to support herself as well, in publishing to support herself. Now, Kirsty has finished her PhD and she's published her first novel called Careless, and she's working on her second novel. I've read some of the comments about Kirsty's novel, which include that it is moving and beautifully written, beautiful and bold, heartbreaking and hopeful, and my favourite, the literary equivalent of gold dust. Let's welcome Kirsty Capes to talk about writing her brilliant novel, Careless.
Oh, thanks, Dee. I don't even know where to go after that. That was so lovely. So that was incredible, Kenny. I'm glad you went first, because I feel like it's a really nice natural progression from what you were talking about to what I'm going to talk about. So my name's Kirsty Capes. Lovely to meet you all. And I, as Dee said, I wrote a book, and it's going to be coming out on the 13th of May. So what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about myself, my upbringing, and how I sort of came to my interest in representations of care experienced people in literature. And then I'll tell you a little bit about my book Careless, and if we have time I'll do a little reading at the end as well. I haven't got a clock in front of me, so if I'm short on time, can you just give me a shout, Dee? And then I haven't got anything to share screen wise, so if anyone wants to just jump in and ask a question or pop something in the chat, feel free, and I can just sort of answer as I go along, because I'm aware it's probably going to be quite a lot to listen to me drone on for ages. So so yeah, that's me. As I said, my name's Kirsty. I was taken into care when I was 2 years old, and I stayed in care right up to the age of 23, because I was still at university at 23. And I think at the moment the law is, if you're in education you go up to 23, and then if you're not, it's a little bit younger. So that's me. I had one very short-term foster placement when I was taken into care for about 6 months, and then I was moved to a long-term placement with my brother, and we had quite an unusual kind of experience going through the care system, because that second placement that we went into, we ended up just staying there forever, which was really nice. So you know, compared to a lot of people, I think we did have quite a stable experience going through the care system, which I think for me, having that stability and the security is really what enabled me to kind of get to the point where I felt like I could pursue higher education, I could pursue writing a novel and things like that. So I was very lucky and privileged in that respect. In terms of my sort of interest in care experience and things like that, I grew up a really avid reader. I read anything that was put in front of me. In terms of my perceptions of care experience in literature, the only thing I really saw growing up where I could identify myself in the book or in the media was the Tracy Beaker books by Jacqueline Wilson. And it didn't really occur to me until a lot later in life that actually I was seeing care experienced characters everywhere in the fiction that I was consuming, but because they weren't explicitly labelled in such a way that identified them as care experience, it was almost like I didn't understand that these characters were care experienced. So when you think of looking at children's literature in particular, things like Harry Potter, the Baudelaires from A Series of Unfortunate Events, these characters are care experienced, but the way they're written by those authors, their care experience doesn't really form a huge part of the narrative. And when it does, it's used to kind of explain a certain set of stereotypes in terms of heroism or villainy, which is what Kenny touched on in his presentation there. So I went through school and college, and I've always written. I've always wanted to be a writer. So when it got to the point where I wanted to go to university, I ended up doing creative writing. And this is the point where I really started to write seriously. And I started to kind of explore my own relationship with my care experience through writing. And I was writing a lot of short stories about care and what it was like for me growing up in care and things like that. And I found for me that through writing, I began to understand a lot more about myself and what had happened to me in a way that I had never done before. And I think a lot of this is down to the way that young children who have been taken into care, especially if they're taken into care at a really young age, as I was, the way these narratives are kind of constructed around young care experienced children's identity, I think can be sometimes really problematic. So something that really interested me was kind of the gaps in my memory in terms of what had happened to me when I was very young, and the stories that I'd been told by my social workers in terms of things like life story work that I'd done when I was still quite young, and then kind of reading in between the lines of what I'd learned from social workers, what they'd kind of sanitized about what happened to me, and understanding the language they were using and then kind of translating it into what really happened. So a lot of the writing I was doing was kind of interrogating that. And I think it's been a really long process. I'm at the point now where I've just, in the past year or so, I've started to access my records from the local authority, and looking through my records, there's still a lot in there that is censored or redacted. So there's still these huge swathes of my personal history that I don't have. And I don't think I will ever have unless I get to the point where I can take my local authority to court and get them to unredact some of this material. So I think for me, writing and exploring that side of my own history was a really important way for me to sort of come to terms with my care experience, but also to understand my identity as a care experienced person and really what it meant to me. And, you know, I went on to do an MA at university in creative writing, and I was writing a lot of short stories about care experience and also about other things. I was writing a lot of poetry, and I got to the point where I knew that I needed to write a story that was going to help me in a way that was kind of cathartic to come to terms with what had happened to me. So it was like I'd always had this idea in the back of my head, I need to write something about this, and it needs to be something I do for my own sort of mental well-being and my own emotional health. And I got to the point in my MA where the sort of dissertation at the end of the MA was write the first 40,000 words of a novel. So I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to write. This is what I'm going to write. So I took all of my short stories and bits and pieces of writing that I'd done over my undergrad degree, and I started to put them together, and I started to plot out this novel. And I wrote the first 40,000 words. I submitted it. I wrote a nice long essay to go with it. I got my grade. I graduated, and then I put it away, and I didn't touch it. And I was like, that's that. I've submitted it. I've got my grade. I've got my degree. I don't need to think about that anymore. And then I decided I wanted to do a PhD. which I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided I wanted to do a PhD. At that time, they didn't have funding from the government for PhDs, so I self-funded, which meant I had to work full-time and do my PhD part-time, which was really hard but worth it. And I started writing. My PhD was a novel. It was a creative writing PhD, so I decided to write a novel for it. And I spoke to my supervisor and I said, I've got this amazing idea. It's going to be a sci-fi fantasy matriarchal Handmaid's Tale thing. It's going to be amazing. All of the women are going to be in prison and they have to find their way out of prison. It's going to be really feminist, all of this stuff. She was like, great, let's write it. So I wrote about the first 20,000 words of it. And I was having these meetings with my PhD supervisor. And after sort of about 6 months, she sort of sat me down in her office and she said, this really isn't working. And I was like, what? This is crazy. This is the best thing ever. I'm amazing. And she said, no, you've bitten off more you can chew than you can chew. You can't write dystopia. You've never read sci-fi, so why are you writing it? I left that meeting and I burst into tears. I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to get a PhD. What have I done? I've wasted all this money on something that's never going to happen. I'm a terrible writer. I'm never going to get published. And I drove home and I was on the M25 and I rang my PhD supervisor and I said, I know you don't like my sci-fi dystopia, but I've got this other thing that's been sitting in the back of my head for a really long time. And I told her about it. And she said, that sounds amazing. You need to finish that book. So that's what happened. I finished the book. It's called Careless. And it was the cathartic experience that I needed writing that book. It's fiction. It's not based on my life, but the protagonist of the book is a care experienced 15-year-old girl. And obviously lots of my own experiences in terms of going through the care system were pulled into that book. It took me about 5 years to write, all in all, from the very first snippets that I was writing during my undergrad degree right to the end where I had this finished manuscript. And it was really, really, really hard. And it was really emotional. And it was really difficult. And I had to sort of confront a lot of things about myself and lots of, things that I was trying to hide from myself while I was writing it. And I had to really, be really sure and steadfast in my own identity to feel like I could put this story on paper and really get to the emotional heart of what I was trying to say. And alongside that, at the same time, I was, investigating representations of care experienced people in contemporary British literature. That was kind of the other half of my PhD. And I was looking at people like Jenny Fagan and Siobhan Dowd and Jacqueline Wilson and, many, many others. And I was seeing, there were lots of representations of CEPs that were really problematic and were harmful and were relying on these kind of negative stereotypes around the care experience. But then there were also examples where these things are not shied away from. The realities of the care experience aren't shied away from, but at the same time, the narratives are hopeful and aspirational and positive. And that's really what I wanted to do with my book. I wanted to show the realities of the care experience. And I think it's really important to do that because there are, everyone goes through care in a different way. And, sometimes it can be positive and sometimes it can be really negative and harmful. And I think it's really important to show the realities of the care experience or my dog might have a little bark in a minute. Sorry if you hear that. So yeah, that's what I wanted to do with my book, and I hope I've done it. I think that the narrative which focuses on Bess, who, as I said, is a 15-year-old girl growing up in care, she finds out that she's pregnant, and she basically, the story is about her deciding what she wants to do about her pregnancy, and also really focuses on her aspirations, her hopes and dreams. And it's really a coming of age story. And yeah, I mean, I hope you like it. I'm going to do a little reading. How am I doing for time, Dee? I'm good. Okay, cool. So I'm going to read you 2 different sections of the book. The first section is right at the beginning, which is when Bess finds out that she's pregnant. And then there's a second section where Bess has a meeting with her social worker. And in that second section, I wanted to highlight some of the kind of internalized prejudices that care experience people can sometimes have about themselves, which I think is very informed, as Kenny said, by the sort of news media and entertainment media that is available to us, and especially available to children who are in care. So I'll just get my copy. This is what it looks like, by the way. It's very nice. So this is the opening of the book. The long and short of it is this. It's the kind of day where the heat sticks plimsolls to tarmac and I'm standing in the toilet in the Golden Grill kebab shop with a pregnancy test stuffed into my backpack. I'm waiting for my best friend Ishal. The toilet is not a cubicle, but a single room with dirty magnolia tiles that need regrouting and oily lipstick smears on the mirror. The metallic smell of periods is clogging the air and my forehead is damp with sweat. My face watches me from the mirror, distorted by the cherry-coloured imprints of puckered lips, my skin the colour of tiles, too much eyeliner smudged around my eyes and a thin sheen of moisture coating my upper lip. The first thing I ever learned about my biological mother is that she was very into astrology, the zodiac. I have a pattern of freckles on my lower back, which if you look at in a certain way, resembles the Big Dipper. And I wonder whether she has the same constellation on her own body. When I was born, I was already dead. I left the womb with my umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. Had my mother hoped I would never come back to life. I wonder whether or not it's time to do the pregnancy test, whether I really counted the days right, whether I'm even late at all, or if this is some gross trick my brain is playing on me. I think about Boy. What would he think if he saw me now? Sometimes Boy drives us to Chertsey, one town over, and we climb up on the spot on St. Anne's Hill with the brick tin observation deck, and we make bets about who can get down faster. And we run so hard, I feel like my legs will swing out from under me and I'll break all my teeth on the ground. And he always wins because his legs are so long and much stronger than mine, which are pudgy from too much sleep and too many kebabs. And when it's autumn, he picks up leaves and twirls the stems between his thumb and forefinger before giving them to me. But we haven't done that for a while now. I rattle my backpack listening for change and realise that I spent the last of my money in the chemist's and now I have none for chips. The small frosted glass window in the bathroom is open and outside I can hear Bora or one of the other guys dropping a rubbish bag into the industrial-sized metal bins. The time is 3:04 p.m, according to the Hello Kitty wristwatch I stole out of my foster sister Clarissa's jewellery box at home. I unzip the front pocket of my bag and take out the long box I got from the pharmacy. I open it and one of the 2 plastic sticks inside clatters to the floor. I gather it up quickly, embarrassed despite my total aloneness. I think about my biological mother, how she might have found out she was pregnant. Her waters broke in the cinema 3 weeks earlier than expected. She was watching The Karate Kid. I don't think about my biological dad at all. I think he was a one-night stand. The social workers told me she never knew him, but I feel like these other things ought to be important. Me with the Big Dipper on my back, her watching The Karate Kid. Who was she with? A friend? Was she alone? And then me again deciding enough was enough and fighting my way out of her body, ripping her open so that while I was being resuscitated in intensive care, nurses violently rubbing my body, she was being stitched back together. She was so sure I would be a boy because a palm reader told her. After they sewed her up and took her to see me in my little transparent plastic box, she asked them, tripping out from gas and air maybe, where my penis was. The nurse who was with her gently told her she had had a girl. She didn't believe I was her baby. She thought I'd been swapped. All these stories told in therapy at the family centre to make me feel as though I knew her my whole life, to preempt any signs of behavioural deficiencies, attachment disorders, sociopathic tendencies associated with early childhood trauma. The case file turned into fairy stories that would make sense to me in ways the truth would not. I'm just going to read you one more section, if I can, Dee. So this is a section where Bess meets her social worker for a meeting. On the Wednesday after our Brighton trip, Henry is waiting for me in the school office when lessons end for the day. I say goodbye to Ishal and go to meet him. In the eyes of social services, I'm classified as settled due to my permanent care placement. So the only time I ever see Henry is when I'm in deep shit and Mum has called him. Henry is tall and skinny in his late 20s, fresh off the boat in social worker terms, with neat blondish hair and sometimes the remnants of poorly removed blue or pink nail polish on his fingernails. When we get coffee, he asks for soya milk. I have a theory that Henry might be a drag queen in one of those big gay bars in Soho on the weekends. Henry takes me to Cafe Mocha in the high street. What the hell is going on, Bess? He says, without bothering with our usual niceties of asking how I've been over the last 6 months. I hate it when he's like this. I say, I'm not going to talk to you if you treat me like one of your case kids. He says, you are one of my case kids, Bess. Henry is here to tick his boxes, ones that say I'm not into crime or hard drugs or being bullied or feeling suicidal or anything. I'm such an easy case. Most kids get totally fucked by the system, end up in 8 different care homes in as many months and then therapy for behaviour disorders or in jail for robbery or GBH. When I was younger, I always felt like I was the luckiest kid in the system by getting placed with Lisa and Rory, foster parents for life. But sometimes I feel like I have the worst luck ever. I always wonder what it would be like if Lisa wasn't my foster mum, if I'd never been taken into care, what kind of person I would be now. I wonder what it would be like to have a mother who loves you unconditionally, like how Ishal's mum loves her. I'm not saying Lisa doesn't love me. She does, I think, even if she doesn't say it, even if she's not allowed to. But there is a disclaimer on it. There are caveats. I asked Henry once why Mum and Rory don't just adopt me, seeing as it's agreed that I'm never being rehomed like a dog. And he looked super uncomfortable and said something vague about money. I worked out afterwards that Mum and Rory don't get paid to adopt, but the local council pays foster carers. Not much, but enough to make it worth your while. When I was younger, I didn't understand why they always saved the receipts for food shopping or petrol if we went out somewhere, or the hairdressers, dentists, all that kind of stuff. When social workers visited, they handed them over. Took me ages to realise I was being expensed. I asked Lisa about it, asked her why they never wanted to adopt me, what the receipts were for, whether she claimed back for the heating and water I used too. And her neck went pink and her fingers fluttered to her throat, and she told me I was being ungrateful, shouted it really, and there was a roaring in my ears like I was listening to the ocean through a seashell. Later on, when I was in hospital, they told me I'd hit my head so hard against the wall that I blacked out. After that, she stopped giving receipts to social workers, or she doesn't do it in front of me anymore, at least. And that's it.
Wow, Kirsty, that's fantastic. I was almost in tears in some of that. And some of that, the receipt and the money exchange resonated with my own experience. Like, I didn't know there was money involved and that my foster mother was getting paid, and when I found that out, I had such mixed feelings about it. And that, and I'm almost 40 years older than you, so it's amazing, those resonances. But brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much.
Wonderful.
Yeah, just wonderful. I've had it pre-ordered for quite some time.
Oh yeah, I need to plug it. Sorry.
Yes, please. Kenny's been doing that in the chat, actually.
It's called Careless. It's by me, Kirsty Capes. It's coming out on the 13th of May, but you can pre-order it now, pretty much from anywhere. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, you can also buy it there as well. In the UK, it's $12.99, or Amazon is slightly lower if you're okay shopping at Amazon. And at the moment, Waterstones have a signed edition on their website. And that's it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kirsty. That's fantastic. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Kirsty. That's brilliant.
Thank you, Kirsty. Can I just add something here?
Do.
Huge. It's going to be huge.
I
hope so.
It is. It's going to be huge.
Has it been optioned for a movie yet, Kirsty?
I don't think we can talk about things like that, can we?
I don't think I'm allowed to say anything, which kind of answers your question.
Yes.
But yeah.
Fantastic. That's really fantastic. Thank you. Well, before we hand over to Rosie to hand over the website, which I think will feature your book there, Kirsty, we were going to just kind of open up the chat to the room to talk about anything that you want to talk about from what Kenny's talked about, or anything from Kirsty ask questions or make comments, or talk about your favourite orphan characters or care experience characters if you do have someone. So it's an open forum now. You can use the hand little icon or just jump in. Go for it.
I'm Jane, and I'm adopted. I was adopted, taken by my parents when I was 10 days old. And that comment about not recognizing that you've seen yourself in fiction, it was only when I was an adult and I looked back, and virtually all my favorite children's books involved an adopted character. And I went, oh, that must have been why I loved them all so much. And so that really resonated with me, that remark. I totally get that.
Thanks, Jane.
A weird thing that I found myself doing when I came home from my PhD graduation was I sat down and I watched Anne of Green Gables, and it was kind of one of those things that I didn't think much about. I just needed to do that. And luckily my daughter was young enough to enjoy it with me, so we sat there and watched about 3 seasons of this particular movie with Megan Fellows, I think, and it was a Canadian production. And I think she was one of the important characters for me, and it was only in recent years that I found out that Lucy Maud Montgomery was in kinship care herself, that she was also care experience. But she was one of those characters who was quite down to earth, quite a normal sort of girl, and spirited and really fantastic. And I think she probably in some ways gave me the idea that I could go on to university and do something with my life as well. She was really important to me.
Sophia, can you unmute her, Dee?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to say something maybe a little controversial. I don't know. It's not too controversial. But like earlier, I think, I can't remember who said it. Sorry. But someone said that. Actually, I think it was you, Rosie. That with books that contain care experience characters, they're not always mentioned in the synopsis. or it's not always mentioned that that's a part of the book or whatever. But something that I've like noticed kind of not rubs me up the wrong way, but makes me feel really weird was I heard about a book recently, and I can't remember the names. This is a terrible statement. But I heard about a book, and I went to go like read about it, and the synopsis started with orphan XYZ and then named the character, and I just went, why is that the first word? Like, and then I read about the book a bit more, and the story's not to do with the fact this character's an orphan. And I was like, that isn't their entire personality though. Like, orphan isn't a personality. And so yeah, that just kind of weirded me out a bit. I don't know if anyone feels the same, but yeah.
Yeah, sounds awful to me.
Thank you. Penny, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, hello Dee, and hello everyone. I'm speaking from Adelaide, where Dee is as well. And first of all, Kenny and Kirsty, thank you very much. My role is Guardian for Children and Young People, so I've got a team, and our job is an independent advocate basically for kids in care, to promote rights and champion and best interests, and I just get inspired every day by the kids I work with. So it's just been, and young care leavers as well I work with, and it's just been lovely to hear from you guys. Feel very strongly about this. I think it's a great initiative, Dee. I think there's so much I could say. I just think high expectations, education, great stories is just so important actually to promote, and for the young people that we work with to believe that about themselves really. So, but I just wanted to raise two things. One was someone mentioned the Netflix series Unbelievable, which I thought was just amazingly good. I was very excited when I came across that. Directed by a woman and a largely sort of women's cast and women's story, and the protagonist is a young woman, or one of the main ones, who's been in care, and she's amazingly resilient and strong. So a great series if no one's seen it. And the other one I wanted to mention was a couple of years ago, before COVID, in Adelaide, we have the Adelaide Fringe Festival every year, and we had a wonderful British theatre company who'd come out, and they put on a production of which people in Britain, England may know about, called Cassie and the Lights. I don't know if anyone, haven't got the gallery on, so I can't see if people are nodding or not, but it was basically an English theatre group who had done extensive research with children and young people in care to develop the script with them. And it was the most inspiring and wonderful and beautifully acted piece. I imagine that it's still available and still happening in Britain, but I'm happy to send a link if people want to know more about it. They came out, and I just stumbled across it at our Fringe and loved it so much. I went up and spoke to the cast later, and it was about 5 in the cast. It was a little production. And I happened to tell some of the young people who are in our organisation in Australia called Create, which is the organisation that represents and supports children and young people in care to speak up and learn to be empowered. And so some of them went a few performances later and absolutely loved it. It blew them away. So I was really happy that they got to see it. So obviously, although it was very moving and quite challenging for them, it also is very inspiring. So I'm really happy to provide, maybe Dee could provide you with details about that, because I ended up writing to the producers and publicising it as much as I could to try and get audiences to go and see it and I'm sure they're performing it in Britain as well. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Penny. That's fantastic. Yes, and I'd love those details. I did watch Unbelievable and thought it was a really unbelievably good show. It was fantastic. Yeah, it was really good. Karen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, good morning or good evening. I just wanted to thank everybody really for allowing me in this morning. And actually I wanted to try and change the narrative myself, because I do have care experience, but was quite different in that I was left. I was left at home while I had a sibling that was taken into care. I was determined as a kid to become a social worker, because at the time I thought social workers were miraculous. because they would come into the house and fix things, you know, for a few weeks or months, and then come back and fix things again. And did become a social worker, but actually I work as a specialist youth worker for young people who've experienced trauma, who are leaving care. But became really quite disillusioned by the narrative around people leaving care too, in that, you know, it was the stuff that Kenny had said earlier, in that the expectations were very much around, they were being written off. And I just felt that, and I have to be really, really honest and say at the time, I'd not been honest about my own care experience working within what is in the UK social services, because I'd been brought up to believe that you didn't tell anybody that, because the ramifications would be enormous. And also that it had been drilled into me as a kid that people like me didn't go to university. We certainly didn't do PhDs. We, you know, we kept our mouths closed very firmly. So I'd crossed a lot of those barriers already, and I really wasn't prepared to share with anybody, especially in social care, about my own experience. But it got to the stage where I felt I had no real other option. And that kind of pushed me into my PhD, because I got really fed up of just that really negative narrative. And so I've focused my PhD now on sharing stories of success. In the main, it's about women, but that women can achieve after we leave care, whether that's about positive relationships we make during our own care experience, or whatever happens to us afterwards and what influences or guides us. I think it's about time that we are able to tell people that we can move on from care and do well, just to share and change that narrative of the really negative perception and expectation of children and young people in care. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say, and hopefully we'll be able to see that from within as well at some point.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Karen. That's brilliant. I think that similarly in Australia that lots of people haven't talked about it. So we're going to go to Jackie next, then Gemma, and then Shauna.
I got a shock a few weeks ago. I was looking on the history of Charlie Chaplin, and I suddenly discovered that he was in what they called a workhouse twice as a young because his mother then got put in Brentford, not Brentford, St Bernard's Asylum. And just now, every time I see him in something or on thing, I think, well, he was an amazing man. His behaviour was bizarre at times, but his personality made everybody happy in the way that he overcome it. There was something else on the local history group for Ealing, and I thought, well, I had seen him at Ealing Studios. We used to be naughty, climb on the walls to the studios, which were about 15, 20 feet. We'd get up on a bird cage in the park and we'd just shout to all the stars that came in. And he was really great, because myself and one of my brothers, we just shouted to him, and that he started doing his little walk along, and everybody was sort of cheering. It was good. But he made a wonderful life, and it's not mentioned very often. You know, you wouldn't have thought that he'd been twice they took him from his mother, but he used to go selling bits of things on the streets in Ealing as well. It was just really, the time frame that he was in care was really, really years and years and years ago. And I think if people knew he had been in care, whatever, that they would just gloss over it. But probably his experiences gave him his survival instincts. And he was great. So he's my superhero.
Oh, that's lovely.
That
He
is
is
lovely.
using the website, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And I recall he used to run away. Eventually, he ran away and hid from the authorities so he wouldn't get taken away anymore. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Jackie. And Gemma?
Hello everyone. I didn't really have a question, but I'm quite happy to speak and make just more of a general observation. I am very lucky to be a colleague of Kenny Murray, someone that I work with quite closely and have done on presenting the history of care and been alongside him. And a lot of the care experience young people that I work with have been part of Media Club and have really enjoyed receiving books, their very own book that's come through the post that Kenny and his colleagues in Media Club have sent out to them. And that's been really lovely for them to be able to see themselves in books and also to be listened to for their opinion when they get to then submit a review of what they think the book was like. And so that's been a wonderful thing. So it's nice to see Kenny being recognised all over the world here this morning. I also have a copy of Kirsty's book, something which I just loved reading. I myself am adopted. I was adopted at 3 months old, went into care straight away as a baby. And I found myself asking quite a lot of questions that I hadn't thought about that Kirsty wrote in her book, the way that the girl thinks about what did her mum think and what did her mum feel when she found out she was pregnant. I know very little about my own life, but the bit in the book, I don't want to give it away, but I suppose when she's talking about the foster carers and how they would like her to make one particular decision, I wonder what that was like for my birth mum, and that was something that was really lovely for me to think about. It was difficult, but and also I think I spent 3 days on the couch until I read it, so I only got off the couch to take the dog out and then come back in, so I would definitely recommend that. My dog is called Pip. If any of you like the classics, Pip is in Great Expectations, and a favourite character of mine would be Jane Eyre. So yeah, just really enjoying what's happening for the first Care Experience History Month. I think when we're talking about celebrating individuals, there's an individual being celebrated every day on Twitter, so that's really lovely to go on and see that, and then to share that with the care experience people I work with, and also with other people, just to spread the education. So thank you for letting me talk, and yeah, I'm really enjoying listening to everyone this morning.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Gemma. And I have to say that Kenny's a family favourite. My husband and I met Kenny when we were in Glasgow, and yeah, he's definitely one of our favourite people. Shauna, you're up next.
Hi. So I just want to say, thanks for setting this up, because it's been super cool. But one thing that I really wanted to say is what Kenny was discussing really resonated with me, because earlier on last year, during my masters, one of my friends came to me and was like, "Oh, they're building a residential home near where I live back at home, and my dad has been kicked out of the group chat with all the neighbours because he refused to sign the petition." And I was like, "Oh, that's really bad." And then I was in a situation, and it wasn't done in a malicious way, but everybody was like, "Oh, your care experience, what do you think about this?" And it was 20 questions just because I was care experience. And I feel I don't know, it was a really weird situation. It was a good thing that they were all speaking up against it, but then they saw me as a representation of that. It was just a really weird experience. I don't know if anybody else has experiences like that. And it really opened my eyes, I guess, to how they treat people in residential homes. I was I knew it was treated badly because people speak about it badly in care as well. I didn't realise how far it went in the media and how they got away with that without somebody held accountable. We're talking about vulnerable children getting hate in the newspapers and of local people, and then for the poor children to walk through the town centre and people are protesting against them. It was just madness. And I grew up in care and I wasn't aware of this, and then when I was put in a platform to be questioned, and it was just a really strange situation, I guess. But yeah, thanks for setting it up. I think it's really needed. Yeah, we all need to question this representation of us all in the media. So yeah, really needed project. So thanks. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shauna. I remember Alan Jenkins I think it's Alan Jenkins in his Plot 29 book, where he talks about the hierarchy of family and how residential care is at the bottom of this family caste system. And he was talking about his experience in the 1950s and 1960s, but it sounds like from what Shauna said and Kenny said, it hasn't changed. And certainly I think that would be the view in Australia as well on that caste system. You're muted, Rosie. Are you trying to say something?
Yeah, I was just about to say I did a little bit of research about the children's home that I lived in Muswell Hill. And I think it started around about the 1930s. And believe it or not, there was a petition. And I went along to the archives and I found all this amazing information about the children's home when it first started in the council minutes. And interestingly, the council were like, well, actually, they're probably, you know, they're kept an eye on, so they probably have to behave a lot better than some people's children, you know. And so the actual council officers were very much against the petition, which was actually really interesting to read about. Yeah.
Wow. That sounds like a positive. Karen, you've got your hand up. Did you want to add something before we hand over to Rosie are you going to show us the website?
Anne's got her hand up.
Oh, okay, I can't see, sorry. Oh, yes.
No,
Mariella.
I'm very sorry.
Mariella, yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I raised my hand in a very different way. So, but I'm so overwhelmed by what I've heard this morning, and I thank you, Rosie, so much for inviting me. All I wanted to say is that I think children who grow up in care are so brave that the grown-ups are afraid of them. I've done my my research interviewing young people who grew up, they're around 25 years old, in residential care, in foster care, in domestic adoption in Romania, and in international adoption, adopted from Romania. And I've done research in England as well. So it's not the type of placement where children grow up, it is the quality of the care they receive. And care has been so much a matter of moral luck. And I think we need to change that. We need, you know, to find positive ways to talk to people, and we need to be ethical as well. But changing the narrative is absolutely essential. It's so important that this is happening, and I think so much is going to be generated by from this group, and you know, contribute to the wider debate. Thank you so much. There is so much I would love to say, but I think it's enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariella.
So Anne has got her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for the connection, Rosie and to Dee, because my connection with Australia and UK is the fact that from the age of 13 months to when I was 9 years old, I was fostered by a white family in the UK. It wasn't at 9 years old, they then emigrated to Australia. And unfortunately, because I was a child in care at the time, I was only a foster child, I was unable to emigrate with them, partly because of obviously not being their child, but also being black and the difficulties that I would have faced coming to Australia, even if I was an adopted member of that family, that I would have faced as a 9-year-old. So it's quite interesting to listen to some of the stories that are currently around about transracial adoption or transracial families that exist. So to actually hear their stories, and obviously my onward journey, again, I have written a book and explored all those matters in that. If anybody's interested, call me auntie. But that connection with Australia is still, you know, quite imminent. My family, obviously my Australian family, remained there, and they went out as £10 POMs, but I remained in the UK. and then went into stayed within a children's home for the rest of my care experience. So I just wanted to share that connection with Australia.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
brilliant. Thank you, Anne. I wonder
Yeah.
if you in the chat you just type the name of your book for
Yeah,
us.
certainly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be fantastic. Yeah, really interesting story, and that interesting connection with both countries. That's
Thank you.
fantastic. Is there anybody else who wanted to speak before we
Mike
hand over?
put his hand up.
Mike, yes.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning. I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I am a foster carer. I play music and I make films. And a few years ago, I did make a short film about a young boy in care. And at the time, it was more around being a frustrated foster carer, just stuff I was seeing. So for whatever reason, had some effect on me, and I got a bunch of actors together and some money and made a short film. What I didn't realize then was that I've just done it from my perspective as a foster carer and tried to make it as, from what I was seeing about what I saw the child experiencing. But what the film has exposed me to is being here, because the children that came into my family home, they were sort of aged from 2 to 15. Didn't really have many conversations about what it was like to be in care. But since then, I've met adults who are 30, 40, 50 that tell me what it was like to be in care. And it's been really good for me. And I think, all the foster care and training that I go to, I never really hear that perspective. It's I don't know what we talk about in foster caring, but it's not this. So for me, it's really good to be here so that I can, understand better what's going on. Yeah, that was all I wanted to say, really.
Thank you, Mike. That's a really important perspective. Is there anybody else? Because I can't see everybody in one look, so I'm having a look. Frank. I've seen a waving hand. Frank. You're on mute, Frank.
Thank you. Let me repeat, it's such an interesting discussion, such a diverse group. I just wanted to convey to the group a movement which is very strong in Australia, and I suspect it might be strong in other countries too, of reaction to the historical records of child time in care, overwhelmingly drenched in negativity and judgments about parents who are morally incompetent or incapable. The children are problematized virtually every day. That's the reason for their being in care. That's the record. That's the reason why the records are made. And in Australia, the freedom of information or the access to records legislation, it actually enables care leavers who are unhappy with the records to have them amended in some way. If they're inaccurate or out of date or misleading or just simply incomplete, and many of them are all of those things. A lot of people have said, I don't want to do that. I'd rather take control of my history and give my story to the public or to my family or to my friends, tell my story in my own way. I don't want to have that story written in a counter narrative written in my record. So at the last count in Australia, I think we got to about 150 published books by care leavers who have taken that view that they want to tell their story to someone, whether it's to the public at large or whether it's just to their families. And I think that's a very strong driving force in response to what they find in the official records. And it really comes down to the question, I think, for many of them, who owns history? You know, you're telling my story in my records. I don't recognize my story. I don't recognize myself in your records. I'm going to write my own. I just thought I'd throw that thought forward.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, very important too. Thank you. And we've got Fiona.
Oh, hi there. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to thank Rosie and Dee and everyone else involved in putting this together, because I spent 6 years in care from the age of 12 to 18, and but had left care for independent accommodation by 16, and just very, very glad that things have changed. I later went to university, did a PhD, familiar theme, did some research with young people in care of mixed race heritage, because I was particularly interested in the stats around their disproportionality in the care system, and did some research with young mixed race people, and subsequently wrote a book, and am now embarking on another book about my own personal experience. So I just wanted to put that out there, just to say that I'm grateful for this community that is being built and created, and hopefully there's a legacy there for other young people currently in care and leaving care, that they can find support within. So it's really a comment to say thank you, and an appreciation of everyone's work.
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, really. And I really hope this, I've really enjoyed this, connecting with this community, not just in Australia, but overseas. And like you, I hope that continues for young people as well, so they don't need to come out and feel isolated and disconnected. And our local hero, Jamie Crabb, you've got your hand up there.
Hey. Hi everyone. I'm a bit brain frozen after spending all day on the website. But I just want to say thanks to Kenny and Kirsty, because that was really resonant. Everything that you said was stirring. And I also just wanted to pick up on Frank really around stories and how we tell our stories, because I'm not sure that there's been many spaces created that can support that properly. I mean, my own journey, I actually really interesting connection with Australia a couple of years. I travelled to Australia to meet my uncle, who had been trying to get contact with me whilst I was in care for years, but social services has kind of stood in the way of that. And I found that when I went across the sea, and I've actually got the story of my mum here, which he constructed for me. So and his story, because he passed away just this past summer. So I just got to meet him literally. I was very lucky. Managed to get to Australia in December last year, and then he passed away this July. So I just wanted to mention that. But yeah, I'm just thinking about how rubbish therapeutic life story work intervention. I mean, it is. There's a certain level of it being provided, but not consistently, and certainly not for adults. And just how we think about creating spaces for care experienced people to come together to feel that they can gently explore and share their stories together. I remember when I went to see Lem last year, I think when he launched his book, and he said something like, we should have these residentials where, you know, you're amongst lots of care experienced people, and basically you read a couple of pages and you go for a walk with somebody, and then you come back, and, you know, and there's just this very gentle, supportive, community-based process, and, you know, with a lot of care and attention. Because, you know, as we explore our narratives, and certainly when we look at files, because I really agree with Frank that, you know, they're often very triggering and don't represent us. And, you know, I've been working on a life story work project with the Reese Foundation recently, where we've been thinking about what does the support look like when you access your records? You know, not the bit where you go and pick them up. We all know that bit and it's quite triggering, but what do care experienced people need before, during and after the process? And actually, I spoke to Terry Galloway recently, actually, and he informed me that actually in government legislation, there is stuff in the legislation that says that when you go to pick up your care files, there is supposed to be intervention to support you before, during and after. It's just not actually actioned. And and there's a lot of interpretation of what that is. So we need to, you know, one of the things I said to Terry was that we need to share this with care experience people, and we also need to empower care experience people to kind of ask for that support, and be more insistent about it. But we also need to create it as a community together, because I think we're being let down by systems that just aren't tailored for offering that kind of community relational based process for telling our stories. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. All right, but thank you. I've been really blown away, by the way, of the archive. When Rosie and Dee and we started talking about this, and then they built the archive, and I looked at it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is phenomenal. And it's just the first phase. I'm really excited, and I've just had a great time working with them. So thank you guys for including me too.
Well, and thank you, Jamie, for all your help. It's been marvellous. But do you want to talk to this now, Rosie?
Yes, we apparently what's happened is that the second update has not worked. So we're sort of, it's a little bit itty bitty, but you're going to get an idea of what it's going to be like. As Jamie said, it's the first phase of us uploading, and there's about 1,300 entries. And there'll be different ways of searching. We've got the search button here, and also if people want to submit, well, it can be, let's have a look at what we've got here, academic books about care experience. What we're really focusing on though is representation. So because I mean there are hundreds and hundreds of papers by you know, in the social sciences arena, isn't there? Some of which are on Jamie's Reclaim site. So yes, academic articles, books, theses, actors, artists, autobiography, memoir, behind the scenes. Now, behind the scenes means people that have worked in film, you know, directors or whatever. And on the blog, we've got David, and David talks about when he worked in media. And yeah, because in fact, one of the areas that we're a little bit low on is behind the scenes. And David has done loads of work over the years, making programs and working with people. If we go back to the genres, biography of care experience people, blogs, webs. We've got children's fiction, of course, non-fiction. Dancers were a bit short as well. We've got one dancer at the moment. Fantastic story behind Michaela de Prince, who was in an orphanage in Sierra Leone during the war, and was adopted by a Jewish couple, and they've adopted about 8 children apparently. And she had, the thing that kept her going in this war-torn country was a photograph of a ballet dancer. And I mean, whoa, and look at her. She is absolutely amazing if you read about her. So I've what was I going to, yeah, so I mean, we've got obviously all of these different subjects here. Let me just, let's go to films and videos. Now, I think what's happened is that some of the photographs haven't worked, but you can get an idea here of some of the films. This is one of my favorites, Queen's Gambit. I watched that this year, and oh, actually no, it was last year. I was absolutely blown away by the scenery and the actual story, which I really, really enjoyed. Oh, look, Mike, here's your film. I mean,
wow, wow.
You are there. And the idea is that when you click on, you then go and find a bit more out about the film or whatever. We've got loads and loads. What else should we have a quick look at? Yeah, now, I don't know if people remember what I said earlier on. Sorry, I'm not going to do any testing or anything like that. But one of the things that I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about is the ordinary person. And we've got now, you can see that a lot of the pictures here haven't worked. And this, so for example, there's a young chap, I think he's only about 21, and I could, let me see if I can find him. He's here somewhere. So we've got, you know, the famous care leaver, adopted person, Jackie Kay, but then we've also got, it goes on, and I'm not sure if I should press that button. Oh no, that's for Joy. Okay, so he should be here somewhere. I know where he is. I've just remembered. Yes, I think he is under blogs. He's under blogs. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen when I press this button. You can get the idea, though, of what this is going to be like. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, actually, in the last few days... Oh, look, there's Kirsty. It's David again. Let me see if I can find... Oh, no, we could be here for a long time because there are literally hundreds. Oh, there's Charlie Chaplin. Somebody mentioned him earlier. Anyway, so the idea is that, say, for example, David Akasanya didn't have a website. And so what we've done to get around that, but to also include him in behind the scenes, is to put him on the blog. And that way we can now link to the blog from one of the indexes. So we'll also be having A to Z of authors, and what's the other thing we're having? A to Z's, and we've taken it off for the time being. Genre. This is not genre, actually, is it? No, anyway, so we'll have A to Z. It's just as well I don't know what I'm doing, isn't it? I mean, because otherwise... yes, we'll have A to Z's of authors, and we'll also have subject. And it will be these things, but in a slightly different order. So, for example, under... I don't know, I'd have to go and look at my website, my spreadsheet, which I haven't got in front of me. But anyway, this gives people an idea of what it's going to look like, and the amount of information that's going to be in the archive. We've got our little about here. This is about, there's a lovely video here that Dee put together that talks a bit more about what we're doing. So I hope that's given people a bit of an idea of what this is going to look like. And over the next few days, we'll be, you know, working behind the scenes to improve the links and everything. So I just want to end by saying that one of the things I was thinking about was, Dee was saying earlier on about, you know, sometimes you look at a film and you don't even know that actually it's got the theme of, you know, foster care or adoption or whatever. And one of the things that we're doing with this, with the entries, is that we are focusing on the care experience of the person, the actor, the singer, the dancer, or the fiction book or whatever. And so, in fact, we are changing the narrative by doing that, which is, I think, one of the most exciting things about this archive. And once everything's up and working, the first thing you will see is that person's care experience, and then you will go on to find out more about their what they've been doing in their life. Okay.
All right, fantastic. So I wonder if Polly is there and ready to do the official launch on behalf of Welland Trust, to whom Rosie and I are very grateful for some funding to get this underway.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Hiya. Thank you so much for inviting me today. It's been lovely hearing everything. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of the Welland Trust or who we are or what we do. So if I just tell you a little bit about who we are, and then I've got a statement from all of us, and then I do have a piece of ribbon that I will cut for us all. So the Welland Trust. So we're a family trust that was founded by my nan, Jan Rees. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of Jan, but she obviously does the Rees Foundation, and then she founded the Welland Trust. So forever, as long as I can remember, Jan has been involved in foster care. It's been our life as well as our family. So for 40 years, she's been involved in foster care, and then she actually received an OBE for her services to fostering and support for care experienced people. So myself and my two cousins also are part of the trust, and we're very much involved with the grants and the fundings. I don't know if anybody's met Jan, but she is an inspiration. She's an inspiration to our whole family. She sits at the top of our family, and you know, she really is an amazing woman. And she won't mind me saying that she retired many years ago, but she hasn't retired. She keeps going and going. So the aim of the Welland Trust is that we sponsor and support projects and initiatives that benefit adults who have experienced care. And like I said, Jan is an inspiration to us all. And as us cousins, so it's myself, Sarah and Izzy, we also sit within the trust. And we just hope that we can fulfill her life's work through the trust. So we've written a little statement, so I'll just read that out and then I will officially launch the website. So the Welland Trust are pleased to be supporting such an exciting project and believe it is so important for care experienced people and people working with care experienced people to find relatable literature, art, film, theatre, television, radio, academic material and much more. By creating this one-stop shop of archives, Rosie and Dee are using their own care experience to create a new culture for many people. We wish every success to this new project and hope it will continue to tackle the stigma care experienced people face, promoting well-being for all involved. So, I don't know how I'm going to do with this with one hand. I might have to hold it up like that if that's okay. So by cutting this ribbon, I officially launch the website.
Yay! Up. Can I just take a photo? Can you hold the ribbon up? Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Polly.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've been inspired.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. That's fantastic. Wow. So is that it, Rosie? Are we done, do you think? Or
I think we're done, aren't we? We've got to get back to behind the scenes now. Some of us have. Some of us are going to bed, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I'll be too excited to go to bed for a little while, but yeah, look, fantastic. Thank you so much for coming along, Kenny and Kirsty and Polly, and for everybody who's spoken. And thank you, Jamie, for helping us. Without you, there would be no website. And Rosie, you know, yeah, fantastic. Great working with you. Sorry?
Thank goodness we met.
Yeah, thank goodness. It was lovely. One of those things that you like to call serendipitous moments, I think. Yeah, it was fantastic. And thank you all so much for coming. That's just been absolutely wonderful.